Lisa, would you like to give some library updates to everybody that's joining us?
Sure, and I'll be really brief because I can't wait to hear Leah's conversation about her writing. I loved your first book, Leah. I can't wait to read your next one.
Oh, thank you so much.
My name's Lisa Littner. I'm the library director for the Johnson County Public Library, and we bring you welcome today. We're so glad to have you here to listen to another Authors at JCPL series. I want to thank everybody who's joined us via Zoom, and I also want to thank, if you were a donor to our Snuggle Up with the Book Ball, you are responsible in part for helping us bring Leah Johnson tonight to our programs and help pay for her to be here, and our book giveaways. So we're so grateful for your back in February, your participation in Snuggle Up with the Book Ball. I just want to briefly, we've had a celebration 2 different times today over the Library Foundation's Enhancing the Story campaign. So we're getting really geared up and excited about the new Clark Pleasant branch that's going to be on US 31 in just a few months, early spring 2022. We want to share with you our website, and then I'll put it in the chat when I'm through if you want to visit it later. We are right here. Let's see, we'll get to this page at jcplf.org. This is our site where you can go and learn more about some fundraising for 6 special projects at the new Clark Pleasant branch. So we're not fundraising for the building, we're fundraising for 6 focus areas. Here you can read lots more information, but I just want to share real quickly the 6 areas are an early childhood learning zone where we're really going to try a museum quality destination for preschoolers to learn. We're going to be outfitting a robotics learning lab with fundraising and engaging our teens in the community, having them come into the library to game with their friends and meet new people. We're going to be moving our adult learning center from downtown Franklin to the new Clark Pleasant branch, and we'll be fundraising for some programming funds there. We would like public art to be throughout this library, so we're funding for 3 art projects at the new Clark Pleasant branch. One will be ceramic tile mural in the new children's programming room. We'll have a photography collection in the new community room, and then we're commissioning a sculpture that celebrates women in Johnson County for the front of the library. We're also doing a nature trail that's going to be for fitness, and a community garden. So those are things we are fundraising for the foundation. If any of those are interesting to you or you'd like to support it, you can just click on the donate now and be a part of this program. So thank you all so much. I'm going to stop sharing and send you back to Kelly to introduce Leah.
Thank you, Lisa. And welcome everybody. My name is Kelly Staten and I'm the programming manager for the Johnson County Public Library. I'm really excited to be joined by Leah Johnson this evening for our Authors at JCPL virtual visit. Just a couple things to mention before we get started. If you have your mics on, could you please mute those for us so it's just me and Leah talking until we get to the Q&A portion of the evening. That would be lovely. And if you were one of our free book giveaway ticket holders, we'll be contacting you shortly after our presentation this evening, probably tomorrow and into next week, to ask you what branch you want to pick your book up at. So we are so excited to have Leah here. Leah was born and raised in Central Indiana, so who's your girl there for us? And her debut novel, You Should See Me in a Crown, was the inaugural Reese Witherspoon Book Club YA pick, a Stonewall Honor Book Junior Library Guild selection, and a 2021 ALA Rainbow List Top 10 selection. Leah is a 2021 Lambda Literary Emerging Writers Fellow whose work has been featured in BuzzFeed, Refinery 29, and Teen Vogue. She now lives in Brooklyn, New York, and we're here to talk with her about Rise to the Sun, which is her second novel that just came out, I think, last week. It's packed with irresistible romance and irrepressible heart. Rise to the Sun is a stunning novel about being brave enough to be true to yourself and learning to find joy, even when times are imaginably dark. So Leah, we are so happy to have you here. How are you doing?
I'm all right. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
So just to get things started, talk to us a little bit about yourself and your new book, Rise to the Sun.
Yeah. So, like you said in that really lovely introduction, my name's Leah Johnson. I was born and raised in Indianapolis on the West Side. So I'm an Indy PL person, but I love my Indiana State librarians all over. And so I am the author of a couple books for children and young adults. You Should See Me in a Crown was my debut novel. Rise to the Sun was my sophomore novel. And in 2023, I have a middle grade series starting with Disney Hyperion called Ellie Engel Saves Herself. And I'm really excited about that. Yeah. And this book was a real break from You Should See Me in a Crown, like tonally very different. But I think the heart of it was very similar.
I know I'm almost done with it and it definitely feels very different, but I really like that you said it in a music festival. I know like most of our people on the call, going to concerts and live music was something that we really probably missed during the pandemic and excited to get back to. So I was wondering why you chose to set this one at a music festival.
Yeah, there are a couple reasons. The practical reason was because Scholastic has been gracious enough to sort of give me carte blanche on like what I want to work on. And so I knew that I had to do two books back to back. I had a book in 2020 and I was going to have to come out in 2021. And so if I had to spend a year, it was a very tight turnaround to write, revise, edit, publish the book. I wanted to spend that time working on something that I knew I could not poop out on. And that for me was a story about music festivals because they've been such an integral space for my personal development and coming of age. And so the setting was probably the first thing that came to me. And from there, the characters emerged sort of as a way for me to explore these different types of ideas about fear and grief, but also what it means to find joy and love despite the fact that you are afraid and grieving. And so it all came together sort of really organically. And then I wrote the book almost entirely in a pandemic. And so I was living vicariously through my characters.
I'm curious to know if you had a playlist in your head as you were writing this book. There's a lot of bands that I found referenced that I'm familiar with, like Red Hot Chili Peppers. And I just wonder if there's any music that inspired you when you were writing this.
Yeah. So there are a couple different playlists that I write to. And almost all of them are music that I would not sing along to because I can't. So I have ADHD and it is really difficult for me to like have more than one thing going on at a time. And so, well, not difficult necessarily. More than one thing is always going on in my brain at a time, which is why I have to try and reduce stimuli wherever I can. And so I listen to a lot of like ambient sounds and a lot of artists that sort of just sound like, oh yeah, you know what I mean? So a lot of like, if anybody's ever listened to the band Cigarettes After Sex, them, Rye, Now, just like really soft sounding artists. But the playlist that is like set to score the book, like if the book was a movie, what I would want on the soundtrack. I had to come up with one of those for like our social media stuff. So there is a Rise to the Sun playlist available on Spotify.
That's cool. And then obviously the Indiana connection, both your books are set there. And I kind of love that because growing up in Indiana all my life and living in the central Indiana area for 10 years myself, I see these places in my head whenever I read your books. Do you plan to always set your stories here, or do you think you'll move outside of Indiana for your future novels?
Yeah, I mean, who's to say? Who's to say? I'm not entirely sure what might happen in the coming years. I think right now I'm most compelled by stories about girls who grew up in environments similar to the environment that I grew up in. And so Crown is set in a town it's a fictional town, but it's based on an amalgamation of towns near where I grew up. And Rise of the Sun, while it's not set in Indiana, it is about two girls from Indiana who somehow find each other at this music festival. And there's just something to that. I don't know what it's like to be like a cool, like coastal teen. You know what I mean? I don't know what it's like to be a 16-year-old who has access to, New York City. Like, but I do know what it's like to be a 16-year-old who's growing up surrounded by cornfields, for whom like the most entertaining thing you have access to after like 9 p.m. is your local Walmart. So like those are the teams that I'm writing to right now. But maybe one day I'll switch it up.
So talking about your writing process, can you go through like how you conceptualize your novels and take us through your process and maybe what inspires you beyond growing up in Indiana?
Yeah. I mean, what I want always is to tell stories about Black girls that provides them with their full scope of humanity. So I want to tell stories about Black girls who are afraid, but also very brave, who are foolish, but also very smart, who are really unlucky in love, but also hopelessly hopeful about love. Like I want to continue to write stories that reach back to all the selves that I was at different points in my adolescence. And I think, and I talk about this all the time, but there weren't that many portrayals of Black girlhood when I was growing up, especially not queer Black girlhood. And forget it. You want a story about queer Black girls who are in Indiana? Didn't exist. And so as far as I was concerned as a teenager, as a preteen, I thought that it was impossible to be all the different things that I was and also end up with a happy ending, because the narratives that I saw for queer people, the narratives that I saw for Black folks in literature were pretty narrow. The scope was incredibly narrow. And so for me, I work backwards always from that principle, which is that like, okay, let's figure out what kind of girl is at the center of the story. Let's figure out what I'm trying to say and what mouth has to say it. And so from there, I build out the universe. And I'm lucky that I have an editor who's really tapped into the intention of the work. And so anytime I feel like it seems like on the page I'm veering away from what my goal is, and especially in like You Should See Me in a Crown, for instance, that was like a very happy-go-lucky rom-com. Anytime I was getting a little too angsty, I was getting a little too like edgy, she was like, Leah, this is a Black girl joy book. And I was able to, like record scratch it and come on back. So that's the story process, like how I come up with the story. But the process of like actual writing is like incredibly chaotic and it changes book to book, but mostly it's just me in my room in isolation, watching a lot of movies when I get stuck creatively, and just like going for it, banging out like, a couple thousand words at a time. Like, I know a lot of writers are like, oh, I can't write that much in one sitting. I can't not write a lot in one sitting. Otherwise the book will never get done. So I usually work for huge blocks of time and write my first drafts really quickly.
How long does it take you to write your novels? Are they all different?
Am I still connected? Can y'all hear me?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
Did you hear my last question?
No. Did you add another one?
Oh, yeah. I just wondered about how long it takes you to write a novel.
Yeah. So that also varies book to book. I think it's becoming actually like harder every time I write a book. Like You Should See Me in a Crown was a super easy book to write. I mean, like it was difficult because I was like broke and I was living in Brooklyn and I was working 3 jobs. And so it was like hard to write around that schedule. But the book itself was like a playground. Every time I sat down to work on it, it was like so quick and it was so easy. And I finished that first draft in a matter of weeks. And Rise to the Sun's first draft was very similar. I think I wrote that in like a month, maybe a month and a half. But I also like had to rewrite those manuscripts like completely like from scratch. So I would say like from beginning to end, not to end, but from beginning to the point when I have a draft that is like usable, it takes probably about 6 months per book.
Okay. You kind of touched on this a little bit, but so many teens connect to your stories because they see themselves represented in there. And I was just curious, who are some of the authors that you read growing up that you connected with?
Yeah. I know it's like uncool to say this now, like because he's like so famous, but I loved reading John Green novels when I was growing up. There's like, and even to this day, if John Green drops a new book, I don't care what genre it's in, I'm there. I'm at Barnes and Noble. I'm at my local Indy on the first day picking it up. So I loved John Green books. Sarah Dessen was for me like the OG, like the gold standard of romance. And so I read a lot of Sarah Dessen. I've read The Click, which like, if y'all recall, was like a book packager series written by Lissy Harrison. And I was like obsessed with those books for a really long time. And so those were like my touchstones when I was in middle and high school. And then when I got to college, I was able to read like Nicola Yoon and Becky Albertalli, and those became like the writers that sort of defined how I thought about story.
And now they're your peers, so that must be a strange feeling.
Yeah, it's really odd. It's like I did an event with Nicola Yoon the other day. Like, she helped me launch my book. I was in conversation with her for my book launch, and it's really, really weird knowing that like the person who's like sort of behind why I write the stories I write, I could just like text her if I wanted to and be like, "Hey, Nikki, quick question." Like that is like a super. That's a super surreal place to be. I'm like in my head, I'm still like, oh, such a scrappy debut, like underdog story. And then I like show up to something and somebody will be like, it's not you, you're 2 books in, you're not quite the scrappy underdog anymore.
Do you have a character that you've written that you feel is most like you?
Yeah. I mean, I think on paper, Liz Leidy is probably most like me. But I think Tony and Olivia in Rise to the Sun are both very similar to me in different ways. I'm super, super aligned spiritually with who Tony is. She's very cranky. She's not really interested in like being super joiny. She doesn't really want people to get too friendly with her. I definitely can understand that after living in Brooklyn for a while.
So what are you reading now? What are your favorite things that you're reading at the moment? You're still there.
No, I caught the beginning. So was it, what are you reading?
Yes, what are you reading now and what's your current favorites?
Yeah, so okay, I don't have a lot of time on my hands to finish books anymore. It's ironic how that happens. The more books I write, the less time I have to actually like read. So I have gotten really into graphic novels lately. That's been like my go-to because I can finish them in one sitting, and narratively they're just as strong as prose novels, but they're just like easier to process, I think, when you are like struggling to focus. My most recent read, I finished this last week. It's called Snapdragon by Kat Lee. It's so good. It's like warm and funny and smart and gay. I am a huge fan. And I also keep recommending this to everybody. And I know that like Molly is probably going to be like, Leah, I'm begging you to read another book. And that's The Girl from the Sea by Molly Knox Ostertag. Like brilliant. There's a little bit of discussion of eco-terrorism, but it's mostly a love story. It's like there's a lot of good stuff happening in that book. So those are my two most recent reads.
Those sound pretty interesting.
Yeah.
So have you heard of any plans to adapt your books into movies or the small screen possibly?
Yeah, so we're always working through like ways that we can adapt this story into different mediums, whether that's like audiobook, whether that's television, film. For You Should See Me in a Crown, I actually don't have any control over the rights to that, like the film or dramatic rights to it. So I'm not sure what's going on with any You Should See Me in a Crown adaptations, but we've been really lucky that we've gotten a lot of interest in Rise to the Sun recently. And so I've been meeting with like producers and, directors. It's been like a very wild ride the past couple of months, but there's chatter happening, but Hollywood is so fickle, you never know.
Yeah, it'd be nice if they would involve you in the creative process somehow. I know sometimes they do, but often they don't.
Yeah. I got like I'm pretty fortunate. Like my film agent is Lee Bardugo's film agent, and so obviously like Six of Crows just got adapted recently, or Shadow and Bone got adapted recently, and so I'm really like, let's just make sure that we have it lined up the same way Lee does, who gets to sit on set and help cast and write the scripts. Like that would be the ideal.
All right, so tell me about your new project. You mentioned a deal with Disney. Any new series?
Yeah. So I have a new series coming out. Like I said, the first book in the series is called Ellie Engel Saves Herself. It's about a 12-year-old girl named Ellie Engel who's growing up in a small town in Indiana. And after a freak earthquake one night, she wakes up and realizes she has the power to bring things back to life with her touch. So it's about literal like Black girl magic. It's been described by my agent as a superhero origin story in the style of the Babysitters Club. And so every book in the series, it's really cool. Every book in the series has a different main character, and all of them develop powers in a similarly strange way. And they're all the most unlikely kids to be superheroes. They're unassuming, they're quiet, they're nerdy, they're weird, they're like, growing up in households where nobody expects them to be great. And then they just wake up and have more power than they know what to do with. And so that's been a ton of fun to work on. And it's been a lot of fun to write in an age category where I think the readers are more open to silliness. I think sometimes in YA, especially contemporary YA, we get like kind of bogged down and like, that would never happen. Like I can't even read this because that's unrealistic. Well, of course it's unrealistic. It's a book. Like this isn't like, nobody's doing this stuff in real life. The stuff that happens in my books, I don't know about other people's stories. But with middle grade, you can play a lot more with what could be real and what we believe to be true about our world. And so it's been a lot of fun working on it.
It sounds like it will be a fun one to read. Did you want to read some from Rise to the Sun, and then we can take some questions from our attendees?
Sure. So, all right, Rise to the Sun is a book about two girls named Tony and Olivia who go to a music festival in search of one epic weekend before they embark on the next chapter in their lives. And while they're there, they realize that they need each other and the music more than they ever thought possible. So what you need to know about this excerpt is that Olivia and Tony are in the midst of a scavenger hunt that sort of runs through the entire book. I don't know if I was supposed to be muted. I don't know if that was on purpose. So So Tony and Olivia are doing a scavenger hunt that runs through the entire book. And so they're at a barn at this music festival in search of a clue for the scavenger hunt. But Tony doesn't dance and Olivia does dance. And so Tony is like hesitant to go inside. All right. It's also worth noting that the only other time Tony has ever danced with, Tony is the speaker in this chapter, only other time Tony has ever danced with another girl, she accidentally punched her in the nose and broke it. So she's not really super excited about the idea of dancing with Olivia. All right. There's just something about her standing in front of me, happy and light, that makes her energy infectious. I don't know why she wants to dance with me, why she doesn't dip out and do her own thing between clues. It's not like I'm a lot of fun, really. I mean, my best friend thinks I'm funny, but that's only because he's the only straight man on the planet that I think isn't worth tossing aside from like Paul Rudd and LeVar Burton, obviously. But people like Olivia aren't normally drawn to people like me. We finally reach the front of the line, and the volunteer at the door holds out her wrist for Olivia's hand. When she stamps her and waves her in, Olivia adds, "I swear to protect my nose. You don't have to worry about me." She holds her hand up in an incorrect Boy Scout salute, grinning. "And I vow to hold your secret with me as long as we both shall live." I sigh and stick my arm out to be stamped as well. "You better watch your face. I'm not kidding about being a menace to society." And I think she might say something in response, but the moment the doors open and we step in, I can't hear anything else but the pulsing sound of bass. The barn looks surprisingly club-like, despite the dirt floor and the lofted beams that still hold hay bales as if an animal could trot in at any time. There are about 100 people in the barn dancing to whatever it is the DJ is currently playing. They're moving together, some with more rhythm than others, but everyone seems wholly unconcerned with what anyone else thinks. I don't want to move, but that seems out of the question as Olivia grabs my wrist and pulls me to the center of the dance floor. There's a disco ball above us that casts prisms of light across her face as she turns it to the ceiling. We're close, but not close enough to touch. The back of my brain is screaming, retreat, but I can't bring myself to listen to it. All I want to do is watch Olivia move as she allows the music to take over. It's everything. When she opens her eyes and sees me staring, I don't look away even though I want to. I want to be honest, like she said. And my most honest self just wants to watch her get lost in this right now, whether I know how to dance or not. But she doesn't let me get away with it that easy. She reaches for me, softly wraps her fingers around my wrist and tugs me closer. It's so slow and gentle and completely at odds with the way people around us are moving, the mass of bodies pulsing and crashing together like atoms. But in the center of all the chaos, it's just me and Olivia, my hands barely grazing her hips as she sways. She smiles and my heart feels like it's in my throat. I'm not sure what to do or how to catalog this sensation. I'm a runner. My dad was a runner, and he never learned how to stand in a feeling long enough to pick it apart. But all Dad's running ever did was carry him further and further away from the people who loved him the most. All it gave him was a restless heart and a daughter who only knew him through stolen moments between tours, anecdotes of life on the road, and guitar riffs. Maybe that was enough for him. And maybe for a long time, I could convince myself it was enough for me. But not anymore. Not right now. Here, in this moment, I'm anchored. I'm facing this girl and the bigness of this head on. "Trust me," she mouths. My palms are sweating. I've only ever trusted 3 people in my life, never gotten close enough to trust anymore. I hold on to her waist a little tighter, and I answer with my body. I do. Thanks.
I loved it.
Thanks.
We have a comment in the chat from Jennifer, and she said that there was a quote that resonated with her from your book. I just want to share that with you. She says, "There's nothing you can do with Black girls who aren't respectable and easy to understand and the best at everything. We're disposable. All this time I've been told I deserve what happened to me, that I was too much." And she says, "I love how your characters confronted these sentiments and turned them on their head."
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. Yeah. that means a lot to me. I think a lot of young women grow up with this idea that in order for them to be worthy of care or love or affection, they have to be perfect. And if you're not perfect, then you deserve to be punished or to be, outlawed or like whatever. And one of the things I love most about writing Olivia was that I got to write a very messy girl. Like, she's messy. She's not good at school. She's very selfish. She throws caution to the wind. She makes a lot of risky decisions. But at the end of the day, I love her because it requires so much courage to throw yourself into situations like that head first. And I just really liked playing around with a character who has some flaws and is still worthy of the same happy endings as a Liz Leidy, who was, for all intents and purposes, like a pretty flaw-free kid. So yeah, thank you. That means a lot to me.
All right, I think we're going to open it up to questions from our participants now. If you have something that you'd like to ask Leah, would you go ahead and put it in the chat, and then I'll try to keep up and read things to her so she can answer them. While we're waiting, do you have a favorite character that you've written?
I don't know if I have a favorite. I don't think I do. I really love my like secondary characters. They're always a lot of fun for me. And so I think in You Should See Me in a Crown, Jordan is like a longtime favorite of mine. He's just like a goofy, like hot, nice guy. And I think that's like for me the gold standard of what you want your high school guy best friend to be.
All right, Gretchen would like to know how your series came about, and I think she means your new one that you're working on.
Yeah. So a couple months ago, like at the beginning of the year, I was having a conversation with my friend Justin Reynolds, who some of you may know. He wrote the book The Opposite of Always. And we were trying to come up with a way for us to like write a book together. Like, we were both like married to this idea that the two of us were going to write a rom-com together. And we were trying to come up with some ideas. We were like brainstorming, and I was trying to figure out like, man, okay, so Justin writes sort of a speculative type of romance. Like, his first book deals with time travel. His second book deals with reanimation. And I was like, I don't do that. I write like straight contemporary realistic like rom-coms. And well, Rise of the Sun is not a rom-com, but romances. And I was like, okay, well, what could we do? I was like, superheroes maybe. And so the more I started thinking about this idea about like, okay, superheroes, not bad. What can we do there? Like, how can we unfold that? Of course, I started thinking about like, how superpowers can act as an allegory for a lot of things. Like, X-Men was an allegory for the civil rights movement, and Ellie Ingalls Saves Herself is an allegory for emerging queerness. And so I sat down, I banged out 10,000 words in a night, and I was like in a fugue state, and I like woke up the next day and I was like, oh my God, maybe I have something here. I sent it to my agent on Monday. We took it out for on submission a week later, and within 2 weeks we had like taken the book to auction and sold it. So yeah, that was the beginning of Ellie Ingalls.
Elizabeth wants to know, when you were in high school, what advice would you have liked to hear, and what did you need to hear?
Oh man. Yeah, I think when I was in high school, I wish that somebody would have pulled me aside and said to be kinder to myself. I think at every era of my life, I have like looked back on the previous era and been like, man, you looked so good there, or like, man, you were so cool then, or like, man, like you you had so many like great opportunities then. But when I was in the moment, I was never able to see or feel or experience those things because I was so consumed with like the idea that there was something better and bigger that I should be aspiring towards. And so I would tell my young self to like take it easy and enjoy being a teenager. There's nothing out here in adulthood for you, kiddo. It's bleak. So just take it easy. And I wish that I had had some more people in my life to tell me that I didn't have to crack the first joke about myself in hopes that I would like beat somebody else to the punchline. Like everybody is struggling. Everybody is struggling in a way that you couldn't imagine. And so like you're actually not the most important thing on everybody's mind. So you don't have to worry about people being like thinking like, oh man, she's this and she's that all the time. Yeah, I think those are my two pieces of advice.
I feel like we can probably all relate to that.
Yeah. Being a teenager sucks. It's like really, it's really a nightmare. I think this is the thing. Like sometimes people ask like, oh, like how do you balance, talking about like hefty subjects like racism or homophobia with, a lighter, fluffier romance. And the thing is like, I think teenagers are doing that all the time. Like teenagers are constantly confronting the biggest, like most complex systemic issues there are. Like young women are constantly under threat of violence. Their bodies are constantly coming under scrutiny. They don't have a lot of agency. Young men are victims of toxic masculinity the same way that any of us are victims of toxic masculinity. And so they're reckoning with those things, and they don't even have the tools that we have as adults to sort of process through them. And then on top of that, they're also experiencing everything for the first time. Being a teenager is a messy place to be, and it is constantly lined with great wonder and great horrors.
You kind of talked a little bit about this earlier, but Tara would like to know what you're currently reading.
Yeah. So like I said, a lot of graphic novels. That's pretty much exclusively what I'm reading right now. I also get asked to blurb quite a few books now, which is cool, but it means that like a lot of the stuff that I've read is not out yet. So the last novel I finished was called Nothing Burns as Bright as You. It's by Ashley Woodfolk. And it's coming out next year with HMH. It's really, really good. It's a novel in verse. It is so heartbreaking, but also like just so smart and beautiful. It's a really, really lovely book. I recently read Kate in Waiting by Becky Albertalli, who is like one of my favorite people on the planet. And Blackout by, I'm not even gonna name all the names, Angie Thomas, Danielle Clayton, Tiffany D. Jackson, Nick Stone, Nicola Yoon, Ashley Woodfolk. Those are the things I'm reading.
Jennifer wants to know if your desk is messy or tidy.
Oh, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. It's really, really bad. I can't even work at this desk right now. This is like, so I have like an iMac, which takes up quite a bit of space. And then I still usually work on my laptop, which is like on top of a laptop stand. When I tell you, I can't even, my keyboard is buried right now. Like you can't even, I'll show you. Like what's going on here? You know what I mean? Like what's happening? Not great.
Marty has a question about what do you miss about living in Indiana? What are you glad to have left behind? And tell us about the public library in your neighborhood.
Oh, that's a really great question. But I hate to take the wind out of the sails of this question, but I actually live in Indiana again. So yeah, I moved back at the end of last year. So I lived in Brooklyn for a couple of years while I got my graduate degree, and then I became a professor, and so I stayed around in the city for a while, and I came back during the pandemic to be closer to my family. And so I don't know when I'm leaving again, or if I'm leaving again. This might just be it.
Welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah, New York Public Library is like one of the coolest places. Like very, very cool. The NYPL that's in Bryant Park is like a nerds like Disney World. It's like so cool. That wasn't my neighborhood, but that was the first library I ever went to in the city. And I went there to cry because I was like doing this terrible internship that was like making me miserable. And I just like needed somewhere to cry where nobody from my internship would see me. And I stumbled my way into New York Public Library. And so it will always have a special place in my heart.
Do you have a special branch that you're fond of in Indy?
Yeah, Wayne branch is the branch that I was raised on. And I just found out that they eliminated like overdue fees. And I have not had a library card. I've not had a valid library card in my name since I was like 9 years old, because we got so many fees that like my parents couldn't afford to pay back the thing. And so I just like couldn't use my card anymore. And so like now is the first time in like 20 years I've been able to go to the library in my hometown. So like very cool that I'm like able to visit again.
Amazing. I know
Yeah.
that's definitely a trend in library world, is going fine free or reducing fines to make access better for library users. So
yeah.
Kate wants to know if the main character in your middle grade series will be queer too, and thank you for being here.
Oh yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. Yeah. Ellie Engel is queer. Her biggest concern is that she thinks she might have a crush on her best friend, and she's not quite sure what to do about that until she suddenly becomes a necromancer, and then she has way bigger fish to fry than her sexuality. So yeah, it's sort of fun to play around with it in a book that's not a romance. Like, to talk about a queer character in a book that's not a love story is like has been a really fun project for me.
Jennifer would like to know if your characters have ever surprised or scared you.
Yeah, these are some chaotic girls. Like, they are very chaotic. So I'm constantly getting surprised by their behavior. I will say, for those of you who have read Rise to the Sun, and even for those of you who haven't, there's a character who is Olivia's best friend. Her name is Amani. She is pretty like straight-laced, very facts-oriented, not really interested in a lot of the hullabaloo of falling in love. And I wrote 3 full rewrites of Rise to the Sun before I got to a draft in which I understood why Amani behaves the way she behaves. And then that revealed itself to me as the 3rd act twist. And so that was really fun for me as a writer, but also really sort of scary. Like, oh my God, like I didn't really have control over this story at all. Like, these characters have like taken the wheel.
Beth would like to know what motivated you to start writing.
Yeah. I've known since I was a little kid that I was going to be a writer. I didn't have a lot of other skills. I can be very frank about that. I'm willing to be honest. I was never going to be a doctor. I wasn't going to be a lawyer, a scientist. My brain doesn't work that way. I was bad at almost every subject except for the humanities. And so I was very good at reading. I was very good at writing, and I was very good at like social studies. And so for most of my life, I was like, oh, I'm going to be a journalist. Like, that's the way that you can tell stories and make money and pay your bills and make a difference. And so I went to IU. I studied journalism there. I interned at NPR and at the Wall Street Journal. And I got to my last year of school, and I was set to start an internship at one of the leading newspapers in the country. I can't say who it is because I burned that bridge pretty aggressively. And I had a revelation like 2 weeks before I was set to leave that I was like not supposed to be doing that. I was like, oh my God, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm miserable. Like, you're not supposed to feel this way about a thing that you love. And so I called my mom and I told her I wanted to write books for a living. She said, okay, girl. So she was like, how do you do that? And I was like, well, I think I got to go and get my MFA. And she was like, okay. Well, I guess we'll load up the car and move you to New York. But I'll leave your bedroom open because you're probably gonna have to move back home. And that was the beginning of everything. That's sort of when I knew like that I was gonna write books for a living.
I thought I was going to be a journalist too, and I ended up as a librarian. So I totally relate to that. Tara says that she appreciated your IHSAA handbook joke, and you should see me in a crown.
Okay, can you repeat the question?
Oh,
Because I did lose connection again.
yes. Tara said she appreciated your IHSAA handbook joke, and you should see me in a crown.
You know what? Thank you. Because people don't be clocking that I make very niche local jokes. I make a joke about bass bows on Mass App. Like there's a lot of like very local humor. But yeah, everything for the hometown, you know, like everything's very, very inside baseball.
Chris would like to know if you have a dream writing project or someone you'd want to do a collaboration with, like a graphic novel.
Oh yeah. Well, between me and y'all, I am cooking up a graphic novel as we speak. So, you know, you might see a Leah Johnson graphic novel coming soon. But I would say like, and this is gonna sound so cliche, but I'm gonna say it anyway. I'm living my dreams right now. Like you should see me at Crown was dream number one, and then I was like, okay, I guess we need to come up with a new dream. Then Rise of the Sun was my dream, and then you know my middle grade series became my dream, and so I've been very very fortunate to be able to write books that feel like dreams come true every time they are done. But I think if I had to choose somebody to write a book with, it would definitely be Becky Albertalli.
Jennifer says that The Other Black Girl by Zakiya Dahlia Harris is calling your name.
Oh yeah, you know I know Zakiya, and I'm like so hesitant about reading this book because it's way more intense than I thought it was gonna be. Like people were like, "Oh Leah, it's not what you think it is," and I was like, "Oh, okay." So I need to like clear my schedule to focus on that one. But yeah, it's definitely on my TBR, which is I don't know somewhere behind me, but it's endless.
Yeah, I have that one on my list too. Stephanie also enjoys the local references. I would have to agree with that. There was a basketball joke in Rise to the Sun that I read on my lunch break, and I laughed about the Kentucky game where they beat him at the buzzer.
Oh, you know what? Once again, nobody's gonna clock that unless you actually care about that Christian Watford buzzer beater against University of Kentucky. Because I was like, I came into IU the year after that, you know, IU UK game. And so people still cared about Indiana basketball. Like we were still like, oh man, maybe we can do it again.
Yeah, even though it's been 30 years.
Right. I was like, we couldn't. We failed. But people were super excited about it.
Katie says she would die for a book with you and Becky.
Oh, thank you. You know what? From your lips to God's ears, because I just need Becky to give me the signal. Just give me just the slightest signal that she's willing to do it. And I'm in. Easy.
All right. Does anybody else have any more questions? That was all that was in the chat, but there's a little bit of time left if you have something you'd like to ask Leah.
Hey.
Oh, okay. There was something that was put in the chat, but it was an accident. So I think that's it. Oh, here we've got one more. Do you have any celebrities you want to star in your films?
Yeah. I don't know if you all have ever seen the movie Selah and the Spades. but the star of that movie, her name was Lovey Simone, and I would love to put her in any book adaptation of mine. Lexi Underwood, who happens to be a friend of mine because she like narrated the audiobook for Rise of the Sun, and we've worked together quite a bit. I would love to see her in any adaptation of one of my books. Yeah, there's so many. Shahadi Wright Joseph from Us. There are just so many talented young Black actresses that I would love to see, take a stab at these roles. So there's a lot of them.
All right, we've got some more coming in now. When in-person tours happen again, what town would you absolutely hope to go to?
Oh, well, now that I no longer live there, I would of course love to, go back to New York. Nashville for sure. My family lives in Nashville, and so the rest of my family, not my parents. And so I would love to, hang out with the good people at Parnassus Books in Nashville. LA would be really fun. There's so many YA writers who live in LA and like the surrounding area. I feel like it could be a really cool visit. Portland, I would love to go to Powell's in Portland. That would be really cool.
Can you tell us anything about your short story for Out There?
Yeah, and also shout out to you for knowing that I'm even in that anthology. Very cool. Thank you. Out There was like a super, super cool opportunity. I wrote a dystopian fiction story about two girls who wake up and find themselves the last two people on Earth, or so they think. And it's called Nobody Cares Who We Kiss at the End of the World. And it's about them sort of forging a life free from shame and fear in the absence of like the prejudice community that they had grown up in. And then there's a twist, which I can't tell you if you plan on reading the story, but it was like the coolest thing I've ever, like, it was like, I very rarely look back at my writing and I'm like, that's good. Like that story though was one of those where I like finished and I was like, Leah, that was good. That was really good.
All right, here's our final one. How have you adjusted to your very fast rising star? Do you look in the mirror in shock that a famous author is looking back at you?
Thank you. Wow. That is big talk alert. No, because one, I don't look like this when I look in the mirror. My hair doesn't look like this. My face is like not like this. I'm usually wearing a hoodie with some like stains on it from like pasta that I've eaten cold out of the refrigerator. Like it's just like really unglamorous. But yeah, I think like I was very, very shocked by the reception of You Should See Me in a Crown. And so every day that people tell me they've read a book of mine or that they felt seen by something that I wrote, or it feels unreal to me. Like in my mind, I'm still the scrappy debut who like doesn't have a book, who like is still hustling, like still trying to like grind their way to the top. And then I'll get a text message from Becky and I'll be like, oh my God, wait a minute. This is not like a casual, thing. So I don't know. I'm still very much adjusting to it, but I'm really, really grateful. It feels like I've gotten incredibly lucky. And so I'm trying to do whatever I can to hold on to this luck for a little while longer.
Well, we love your books and we're so glad that you could join us at our library this evening. I did put a link in the chat to Wild Geese Bookshop. They have a few of Leah's books that are signed if you would like to stop in or order them online. And once again, thank you for coming and talking to us, Leah. It's been so much fun to have you, and just congrats on all your success. And thank you for writing stories that people can see themselves in. So
yeah, thank you so much. It means a lot to me. Thank you all for coming.